The Prevent strategy is a government educational programme designed to divert young Muslims away from terrorism. In light of the recent arrests of 3 terrorist suspects, do you think it's working? Is it really getting into the roots of it all?
Well, Prevent has always been a very controversial strategy, partly because how much money has been spent on it. The government has spent almost £200 million on it since 2007, and that's purely for educational community-based work, so it's a lot of money. Part of the problem with Prevent, obviously, is what you judge success by. Lack of terrorist bombings, if that's the success, then overall it seems to have been successful in the last few years, but there are other ways of judging it, and this case highlights that.
And what other ways, what ways would you judge it by?
Well, if we take the government's understanding of what success would look like, it would be that Muslim communities take more responsibility for policing elements, small elements within Muslim communities who advocate violence, advocate terrorism. So they would like to see Muslim communities working more closely with the police and providing information. Now, this recent case in Birmingham and the convictions raises important issues about that, because the ringleaders have been convicted. We're about to await sentencing of some other people. These were young men who were recruited by the ringleaders and taken to Pakistan for terrorist training. Now, the families of those young people back in Birmingham found out about this. The Prevent strategy ideally would have asked them to go to the police and report it. But in fact, those families used their own networks, their own contacts to bring their young people, their sons, back from Pakistan and divert them away. Now, some elements of the media have said this shows that Prevent has been a waste of money because the community has still not worked with the police. I disagree with that. I'd argue that this recent Birmingham case shows Muslim communities and families taking responsibility. They did what any responsible parent would do when their son or daughter is getting involved in crime. They used whatever contacts they had to bring them away from that physically and to move their thinking and behaviour away from that. So I actually think it shows that Prevent has worked, and Prevent has encouraged Muslim communities to take responsibility. I think it's unrealistic that people will always phone the police about their own children, and in some ways that's a slower way of responding. I think what we see in this case is that elements of the media don't like Prevent, have never been convinced about Prevent, and so are reading into this case another way, another justification for being critical of Prevent.
I know it's a minority of young Muslims that move in this sort of terrorism direction. Sure. But why do they find it attractive? What is the attraction for them? Why are they so disillusioned with perhaps where they are now in Britain?
And you're right to say that it's only a small minority of young Muslims, but there is a significant problem of a number of people who want to carry out acts of terrorism. It's not just a British problem. Obviously, there have been bombings or attempted bombings in other Western countries. And there's a great deal of academic debate about what causes it. Some people will argue that it's economic circumstances, that Muslim communities are economically and socially disadvantaged. Others would say that these communities are politically disadvantaged, that society is anti-Muslim. Yet others would say that it's an international perspective, that Muslims are being persecuted worldwide. Now, obviously, evidence in support of that point comes from things like the military involvements in Iraq and Afghanistan, that from some political perspectives, those can be portrayed as attacks on Muslims. I would disagree with that, but it's possible politically that you can interpret it in that way.
Does Prevent go far enough, or do we need something totally different?
The most questionable point about Prevent is, why has it been so large scale? Not just £200 million spent, but thousands and thousands of young Muslims worked with. I've argued in my recent book, Responding to the Threat of Violent Extremism, Failing to Prevent, that Prevent is indeed failing, because it's not effectively dealing with the small minority who are attracted to violence, but it's not helping larger numbers of young Muslims feel that they are part of society. It's only worked with young Muslims, it's not brought them together with other young people, and it's not effectively working on how to become a democratic member of open and tolerant society. I believe you only get that by bringing young people together and having real democratic debates between Muslims, Christians, white people, black people, Asian people, rather than working separately with Muslims. So I'm arguing that Prevent is well-meaning, but it needs a very radical overhaul, and it should focus much more on bringing young people together and focusing on what they've got in common. Having democratic debates and involvement, voluntary work that brings all young people together and allows them to get to know each other as individuals and as people, not just as a religion or a name for a particular ethnic group.
And does that come under the remit title, if you like, of community cohesion?
Right from the start of the Prevent strategy in 2007, the most fundamental political debate about it has been what's the relationship between Prevent and work to promote what we call community cohesion or integration, i.e. better relations, better communication between different ethnic communities, between different faith communities. Now, the approach that the government has taken to Prevent is to work only with young Muslims. I've argued that that's totally wrong. The effective way to divert young people of any background away from extremism and intolerance is to work with young people together, to bring them together, to promote greater understanding and tolerance. So for me, community cohesion work is the most effective way of building resilience, building a defence against terrorism. We can't truly ever totally work against terrorism because we can never stop an individual moving forward and doing something extreme. But we need to build resilience against people being attracted towards it and against them reacting if something bad does happen.
The University of Huddersfield, inspiring tomorrow's professionals.